Are you ready for another lesson from Howie? I hope so, because this one's a really cool one. Aren't they all? No, just kidding. I think they're kind of cool because I like science. You know, why else would I teach science? But nonetheless, today, as you can see, we're going to talk about waves. So waves, baby, wait. No, just kidding. I will not sing. I'm a horrible singer. But waves are really cool. They come in many different types. So we're going to talk about those. By the way, this is a really cool picture. That's a bee making those waves. I think it's pretty cool. Okay, so what exactly are these waves? They cause a ruckus. How many of you guys cause ruckus at home? So you're kind of a wave. But that's a disturbance, obviously. It's a disturbance that basically interferes or interrupts a quiet, settled state, okay? So definitely I can be a ruckus. My kids can be ruckuses. But that is considered the definition of a wave. So you have this nice, calm, quiet, settled state, and all of a sudden there's a disturbance, okay? So that's kind of what that looks like as opposed to those straight lines. You have a disturbance. They also transmit energy. So when you see a wave, and we're going to talk about waves and show pictures and see some cool little videos, but they transmit energy. They pass energy in many forms. And typically, the energy in a wave is going from one side to another, horizontally, typically, okay? So that's your wave. It's going to move energy in one direction, typically, and sometimes it transforms energy into different kinds. So it's kind of cool. So waves are really cool. They move, but they return back to their natural state. So I always think of a slinky. Think of a slinky as you put it in motion. You've got it at the top of the stairs, and you let it go that first stair, and it goes boing, 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 but it's going to return to its natural state at some point, right? Unless you had this endless staircase, which we don't. So at some point, a wave will return to its natural state. They're also going to typically pass through through a lot of mediums. They can pass through solids, liquids, or gas. Now, not as easily. Think about our sound waves as we're talking. Can you hear me better right now, or if I were to be recording this underwater? You could hear me, it wouldn't be quite as clear, but sound waves can still travel through different mediums. I could even, hold up a solid piece of material, whatever that might be, and yell through it, and you could still hear me, right? So waves do pass through different mediums. It could be a solid, it could be a liquid, it could be a gas. Like we are, obviously passing through those sound waves through gas, because that's what our atmosphere is. So yes, they pass through many mediums and at many different times. So what makes them go though? Okay, you're like, oh, that's cool. Do I have to always start a wave, like, with these lovely dominoes, which I love doing, by the way, as kids, lining them up and then hitting them and go. But the wave is caused by energy acting on that particular thing. So yes, it does need some kind of an energy input in order to begin, right? There's got to be some kind of energy that is inputted into that wave to get it to go, okay? The wave is the visible form of energy moving away from the object that caused it. So typically, think of my voice again. There's sound waves coming out of my mouth. Obviously, it's moving away from me. I'm the one that caused it. And then there's a whole mechanism that causes my sound from from internally. But externally, it's moving away from me, okay? So whatever caused it. Again, with these domino effect, obviously it's going to move away from the finger that, makes it go, or whatever makes it go, if it's your little sister that trips into it or something, okay? The wave is also a pattern, and it carries the energy of the object away from the point it was first dropped into the pond. So say, for instance, we're talking about a different type of wave instead of the wave where, we typically see kind of an energy wave with the dominoes or our, sound waves. But when we think of, say, something is dropped into a pond, that wave pattern carries energy out and away from it, okay? So say that little penny or a pebble is dropped, you can see that it moves outward, okay? So that's kind of cool to think about. Anytime we see a wave, we are seeing moving energy. So I know that sounds kind of silly, and you're like, yeah, who cares? But sit in front of an ocean sometime if you ever get that chance. I didn't get a chance until I was about 16 years old, but nonetheless, you're watching moving energy. And with the ocean, talk about massive amounts of energy. You guys are going to notice that when you read in your lesson, you talk about, or you read and learn about tsunamis and what energy is generated from, you know, basically those little earthquakes that happen under the sea, okay? So there are two types of waves. We have transverse, basically a transverse wave that move up and down and up and down. These are the ones that we typically think of with a wave. You know, we think of water and the waves that are created. That's a transverse wave. We'll talk about these parts in just a moment, but this shows you the typical parts of a wave: the crest, the wavelength, amplitude, the trough, and we'll talk about that in a second. But an example of your transverse wave is your water wave, okay? And I'll show you guys a video that'll kind of let you know. But before we get into the kind of more about waves, check out this awesome wave. Talk about like probably the largest wave you'll ever see in your life. Ah! It's still coming. Yikes! Still going. Don't know where he ended up. Okay, pretty crazy when you think about that kind of a wave. The energy in that wave, that's probably one of the biggest waves I've ever seen. But I just wanted you guys to check out that type of transverse wave. But we will have kind of an overall kind of a review with these waves. The next type of wave is a longitudinal wave. This is going to move from side to side. So instead of the transverse wave that's moving up and down and up and down, and basically running perpendicular to which direction the wave is moving, because remember, the wave is always moving in a direction, but the transverse wave goes up and down perpendicular to that movement of energy. Well, a longitudinal wave is actually moving in the same direction as the energy moves. Okay, so like a slinky, we also call this a compressional wave, where basically it's going to kind of move back and forth, but back and forth, kind of like an inchworm, so to speak. Or it doesn't even have to go back and forth, it can just move along, okay? So it's really cool if you guys ever have a slinky to just kind of mess around with it, where if you just push it, you'll see the wave move all the way across, and once it hits the end, it'll move back, and it can keep going back and forth depending on how much energy. So example would be sound waves, or actually, those are our typical longitudinal waves. They go out in the same direction parallel to which the energy is moving. Vibrations also cause the sound, okay? Now, parts of a wave, and I'm going to go through these real quick, and I'm going to show you guys an actual picture to kind of go through them. But the highest point on a wave, and we're talking about a transverse wave, is called the crest. So when we're looking at those waves, they go whoop, 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 whoop. Okay, you have up here the crest, okay? The lowest point whoosh, is the trough. Pronounced off. Yeah, pretty good. All right. The line that goes through the in-between points, which I'll show you, between the crest and the trough is called the equilibrium. If you're talking about water wave, this is also sometimes called the still water level, okay, where the water would settle if there was no waves. So let's go to this picture real quick and talk about a couple of those, and I'll go back to our definitions. So again, you have basically your tallest point here, okay, and then your lowest point. Okay, so if you guys remember, what are those called again? The highest point is called the crest. The lowest point is called the trough. Okay, so again, up here are your crests, and down here are your troughs. Okay, you also have a wavelength. Okay, let's talk about that. Your wavelength is the horizontally from crest to crest or trough to trough. So that's called the distance between those 2 points. That's the wavelength. But you also have the amplitude, the distance from the equilibrium of the crest, or to the trough, and that's vertically. Okay, so when you go back to the picture, we look at the amplitude from either this equilibrium line to the crest or the equilibrium line to the trough. Okay, and then again your wavelength from one crest to one crest or one trough to one trough. That distance is the wavelength. Okay, now varies. The wavelength will vary with the basically the intensity of a wave, so to speak. So when we talk about the electromagnetic spectrum, some of you guys may not have ever heard that before. You'll get to know that a lot in high school. You have all these different waves on the electromagnetic spectrum, from your visible light rays, which are kind of in the middle, to gamma rays, which are used in chemo and radiation type, not chemo, but radiation for cancer patients. Those have such a high frequency with a very short wavelength, and they are very powerful and can be very destructive. Where on the opposite end of the electromagnetic spectrum, you have these long waves, like radio waves. Very long. They go for long distances. That's why you can basically, catch a radio station for quite a long time, especially those AM radio waves. Okay, and those are not harmful whatsoever. Really long wavelengths. Okay, so there's a little bit about your waves. Now let's talk just briefly about reflection and refraction. When a wave hits a reflective surface, it bounces back. Okay, so basically any type of wave that is bounced back and reflects, we call that reflection, right? You look in the mirror, you have a reflection, that wave hits a reflective surface and bounces back exactly the way it did, when it hit. So that's a reflection. But sometimes waves bend when it comes in contact with a new medium. So say, for instance, when you're looking at this glass of water and you see a straw go into it, it looks like it bends. That's refraction. That's where that wave is looking like it's bent because of changing mediums. Okay, so just know the difference between reflection and refraction. All right, so a quick review before we are done. Let's talk about waves in 1 minute. Ready? Go.
A wave is a periodic disturbance in space and time. Waves, such as a sine wave, can be characterized by its frequency, which is the inverse of time period, and its amplitude. They generally propagate in two forms. Transverse waves oscillate perpendicular to the direction of propagation, while longitudinal waves oscillate parallel to this direction. This standing wave on a string is an example of a transverse wave. This pattern is formed by two interacting waves that have the same frequency but propagate in opposite directions. Longitudinal waves are also known as compression waves because the medium in which they travel is compressed. A surface wave, which can be formed by a water droplet, is a combination of a longitudinal and a transverse wave. Perhaps what is most important is that waves carry energy from one place to another in the form of light, sound, and matter.
There you have it, waves in 1 minute. So I thought that was a good quick review. Hopefully you guys aren't on overload on waves, but waves are kind of cool. We'll talk more about them in our live session. See you then.